Today on the WriteHer podcast, Kathy Douglas and I are talking about tips and tricks to help you write whatever you want. Kathy Douglas is an experienced writer who has worked in various industries to create features for magazines. She's covered breaking news and is the founder of public relations and writing agency Kathy Douglas Communications. Welcome to another episode, Kathy. It's so great to see you. How are you?
Good to see you. Great to be here.
Awesome. Today's going to be really fun. We're going to go through, like I said, I've always struggled with writing. Under your tutelage, Kathy, I have learned so much, and definitely my confidence has grown. So, I mean,
Great.
let's get into it. We have a little bit of a list of, things that can help you if you're even an experienced writer. Everything from new writers to experienced writers, you can find information in this podcast that can relate and help you. So, let's talk about writing, Kathy. What do you think is a place we should start from your experience in the years of experience that you've had?
Well, I think, recently I was a guest lecturer at Ken Hagihara's advanced public relations writing class at Cal State Fullerton. And one of the things that I shared with those students was a story that I remember from when I was director of public relations at Chapman University. And as part of the public relations curriculum, each PR student, in order to graduate, would have to spend a semester working in the public information office, which was what I headed up. And I remember one time this really angry student came in and he was like banging around his backpack and huffing and puffing. And I said, so what's up? And I introduced myself and he said, I resent being here. I think that this is nothing but slave labor. I think that requiring students to do a semester here is just giving you free manpower. And the only reason that I decided on a public relations major is that I could get out faster than with any other major. And I don't have any intention of being a PR professional. And it kind of took me by storm. So I kind of did, kind of a recoil. And then I thought about it for a second and I sat him down when he cooled off a little. And I just said, look, you may decide to go into something totally different than public relations, but if you learn to write well and you can think concisely, you develop your critical thinking skills, you know how to research a particular subject, you gain the ability to talk to each other or talk to someone in order to interview them. And then you can write concisely and well. I said, whatever profession you pursue, you're going to be worth your weight in gold. Your prospective boss is going to look at you and say, this guy can think critically. He can express himself well, both in writing and in person. He knows how to research. This is the guy for me. And I think that the guy eventually quit and changed majors. But I still stand by what I said, because I truly believe that if you have good writing skills, it will stand you in good stead, whatever your profession is.
Oh my gosh. I thought you were going to say, like, at the end, he really got it, like it's got, but that's so true. That's how I used to think of writing. I'm sorry you had that experience too. I mean, the frustration of feeling like you're not adequate at writing, I feel like is some of the time the biggest hindrance of people actually being able to write.
Well,
You
I'll tell you another story, and this is kind of the opposite. Was when I was dating my husband. This was way back before computers. Okay, so I volunteered to type up his research paper, and he was in the master's program for history at Cal State Fullerton. So I'm typing his manuscript, and I started to break it into smaller paragraphs, because as a journalist, you're kind of the quick hit kind of thing. And he later got criticized pretty roundly by that professor who took the paper and said, look, we don't break our thoughts up into tiny little paragraphs. We use each paragraph to create and solve a particular issue. So he was really bothered by the staccato rhythm that I had introduced into this research paper. And I think he was absolutely right. In looking back on it, I was a little offended at first, and then I thought, no, because academic writing is very different. So when you say, you're uncomfortable or insecure about writing, I think it's totally understandable because there's many different ways that you can write for many different reasons.
Right.
But when it comes right down to it, there are some rules that I think are hard and fast. And if you learn those little tips and tricks, then it's going to help you whatever writing you're doing. Like your writing when you do social media, that's the hardest writing of all, in my opinion, because it's so much harder to write short than it is to write long. If you're given 150 words, that's a whole lot harder than 150 or 1,500 words. You
Yeah.
have to be concise, you have to be thoughtful, you have to be accurate, and you have to do it all in a really small space.
Yes. Yes. I never thought of it that way. And for those of you that are listening, um, I'm the associate director of digital media at Cal State Fullerton, and that includes moving digital media through into the next centuries, right? Where are high school students going to be in 5 years in their academics, right? So I used to think, oh, it's so hard, and then I really got the hang of it writing the social copy. Social copy after social copy draft. And the thing with social media posts is people since it is quick and short, people think, "Oh, I can give you 10 and you can create 10." So I've had to become really quick. But the challenge for me that I really want to get into is like feature writing and journalistic writing, like those two separate entities are where I have a challenge because I'm sitting there going, I just put all of my information in the first paragraph. This isn't going
Right.
to be fun to read, it's just going to be quick. So creating things that are fun to read, um for me, I'm like, where is that, constantly looking.
Well, I think you're always at the mercy of whatever idea that you have. So if you have an idea that's really good story idea, then that's half the battle, because then you have an interesting topic that you need to speak with certain credible sources in order to get the quotes and the information that you need.
Mhm,
And then if it's interesting enough, you have several ways that you can get into the story lead wise.
mhm,
So, and you have different ways that you can develop your idea throughout the feature story or the news story or what have you. But so two things come to mind. The first thing is whether it's a news feature, whether it's a news story or a feature story, the critical part is the lead. So it doesn't mean just the first paragraph, but the
mhm,
first few paragraphs when you're getting into whatever topic you're writing about. I've known there's one of the writers that I think is the best writer I've ever known is a college friend, and he was at the LA Times, and he would sometimes send me three different leads, and he'd say, tell me which one is best. Here's what the story is about. Tell me which one is best. Well, this guy obviously spent
mhm.
6, 7, 8 hours just on the lead
Oh.
through trying 3 or 4 different ways of getting
Yeah.
into the story. So that's a good, I mean, that may be the extreme, but I mean, that's a good example of how if you really work hard at those first few paragraphs, you're setting the scene, and the rest of the story can kind of write itself if you know exactly, you've told people maybe a little glimpse of what you have in mind to tell them, you've told them what you're going to tell them, and then now you're going to flesh out the whole story. But that's how important a lead is. um, in my opinion, I was asked it, Ken asked me, and one of his students actually followed up. The question was, what do you do about writer's block?
Oh my gosh. Oh,
And
I hate that.
I just don't think there's any such thing as writer's block. The only time I've ever had it is when I haven't researched enough.
Oh,
If I get to started on a story and I'm stuck, I realize, okay, I didn't talk to um, maybe three. I only talked to three key people, and there's that one fourth person that can give me this perspective that I need in order to write credibly about this particular topic. Or I just didn't read enough background information to be able to write credibly about what I'm talking about. So once I have over researched, which is what I usually do, then I find that the whole key is writing that lead. And if I've researched well, I've talked to the right people, and I have kind of a creative way of getting into the story, then writer's block is not an issue. Now, that doesn't, like today, I have no business saying that because I didn't have writer's block per se. I just couldn't get my butt to stay in the seat. I was like, well, I think I'll go do this now. And then, oh, there's laundry that I need to do. And oh, I better water the plants.
yeah.
It was like, no, Kathy, you have an assignment. You need to do it. There's a deadline. So I
Mm,
think I have a little bit of the hyperactivity going on because sometimes it's very hard for me to sit still long enough to write.
yeah. I mean, I can totally relate to that. I love how you're turning how people use writer's block as a negative sort of like blocking you from completing your job and be like, "Oh, how do you deal with that not being able to do your job?" And I love how your answer is like, "Do your job better." Like research. No, like that's kind of it. Like because I would think, "Oh, I got writer's block and I can't put the words together and it's getting me frustrated." Like then you can take a walk and then come back around, but it's good to know how to get through the writer's block, which is I love how you're saying
Well,
do research.
another thing that, just you reminded me is the best advice I ever got about how to get over writer's block is just to put something on paper. When
Yeah.
you're looking at that blank screen, it's so intimidating. And if you just think to yourself, I'm going to tell the story as if I were telling my best friend. And even if you have to start once upon a time, you just get that first few words on paper, and once you've gotten started, you can always go back and change what you
Mm,
started out with, but you just simply need to start. And once you get over that first hump of sitting down and starting to tell the story, usually you'll get in a rhythm and it will come. But yeah, the blank screen can be very intimidating.
yeah, I look at that blank screen and I think what I'm gonna do is like put little like tips above on the video, like write like you're writing to your friend, because that's so smart. I would be, oh my gosh, girl, you would never believe this. There were 7 cars stolen from Cal State Fullerton, and they found one car with all these keys in it. Like,
Right,
that's
right.
like how I would go about it. That's
Well, I had a really interesting story the other day, and you were talking about your sister in the police department. I write for a thing called Behind the Badge, which is a website that's for first responders. And they had this very interesting story idea come through. This Tustin police officer who just kind of had a feeling about a traffic stop that he made. He just had a feeling that this guy not only was riding in a stolen car, but that there was something more to it.
yes.
And it turned out that when he made the stop, sure enough, the car was stolen. Well, they go into the trunk, they get the permission of the guy, they search the car. It was a stolen car, and the guy whose car it was lived nearby. So they get the guy to come over. So then they've got the arrestee and then the owner of the car. They get permission to go through the car, and they're asking the guy who owns it, is this yours? and it's they come upon a backpack, and the guy says, "No, that isn't mine." They
That's
open up the backpack, and it has about 70 different keys to stolen cars.
hmm,
So his innate like suspicion, his suspicion grounded in many years of doing this kind of work was absolutely spot on. And it led to the arrest not only of the guy that was driving the stolen car, but an entire car theft ring.
oh, yes, I remember you telling me about that story. That is so it's like, let's take that story for example, right? Writing tips. You get this story, and let's say that you have to, write for um Beyond the Badge, and I think the most interesting thing is where I would start. So like tips for writers starting, right? I mean,
So,
yeah,
right, what I thought was initially exactly how it would have hit me if
yeah.
I were telling the story to you. I'd say he just had a feeling. And I
Ooh,
think that's how I started it was, Sergeant so and so um just had a feeling when he made this traffic stop that there was something more than just this stolen car or something like that.
wow.
And that gut feeling that he had was the whole reason for this story. And he was absolutely right. So, and when you're talking about this, of course, is the audience of first responders.
Yeah,
So the cops who are on the beat are reading this and thinking, yeah, I know exactly what he's talking about.
I know that
It's
feeling. I've
that
had that feeling.
innate sense of, they're crime stoppers, so they know about criminals and they know how criminals' minds work. And
Yeah. I mean, that brings an interesting point. I have so many questions because I know you have like all these answers too. Like when like I guess a tip for people to know is like writing for the audience, right? Like since you know that that audience for Beyond the Badges first responders, I like how you used that as sort of the heart of the story, right? So like,
I think, yeah,
yeah,
I think you're absolutely right. There are two things that I think are really important to as takeaways. One is knowing the audience is really important because what you write for Behind the Badge would be totally different than what you would write for the Orange County Register.
right.
It's a good example. The other thing is being concise
Mhm.
because no matter what audience you're talking about, everybody today is so busy. You have right now, in talking to me, you probably have 10 other things on your plate that are vying for your attention. When you go to read the newspaper in the morning or call up whatever website you're reading, in the back of your mind, you're thinking, I have 7 other things that I have to do. So you're competing for people's time at such a level that has never been seen before. So uh, it behooves you to be concise, to be direct, and to be interesting. Because if you don't grab them in that 30-second glance at a lead, you've lost them. So,
CDI, concise, direct, and interesting. All right, we already made it an acronym. It sounds so good. Yeah, that's where socials definitely helped me. So, keeping it concise, and
yes,
people are passing through thousands of social media posts, and what I try to describe to my colleagues who are also doing similar things is they're not here seeking you out. They may not be looking you up actively, checking in with you, so you have to make everything that you post engaging to everybody that could be and is in your audience. So
right, right.
Behind the Badge, 70, how many keys?
I think it was over 70.
Over 70. I don't know what it is about that story, Kathy, but I love that story.
Yeah,
And
it's a good example for it's interesting on so many levels, but I think the thing that interested me the most was just this gut feeling that he had, being so
yeah,
right. And it kind of like, to me, it spoke to that particular audience of, police officers. They operate on gut instinct a lot of the time, and he was absolutely right.
That's crazy. So,
So I guess, going back to the lead, I think that, I could have gotten into that story in many different ways and it probably would have been just as readable. But for me, the heart of the story was this guy and how his expertise and his experience level led to this arrest. Um,
kind of like
you
cracked the
could
case.
have done, the lead could have just been, he thought he was stopping a guy, in a stolen car, but then there were 70 other keys and he ended up with a car theft ring.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have been an interesting lead too. But I tend to think that people really like to read about people.
Mm,
So in almost every story I write, I try to drill down to a person or a group of people because I think that readers relate to that more. That's just my style, you know.
it's like nobody, okay, you're tapping into like the psyche of people when you're writing, and I think as for new writers, it may be really daunting to, you know, to think that, these concepts that you're saying, these are so true. We love to read about stories of people who are succeeding or even the opposite, right? The people who are in
Right,
trouble.
right.
But like, I like how you made it super relatable rather than just focusing on the facts, which for the OCR, might be completely necessary, and they may be more interested in the numbers and where the, the
Yeah.
the facts that go into that.
You know,
So,
it brings me back to when I was editing Titan magazine.
woo!
I would get an assignment or a story idea that would say, hey, the Guardian Scholars Program, we should write about the Guardian Scholars Program. Well, this is an amazing program, right? You could tell a million different stories about the people and the families that have been helped by this program. But the bottom line is people don't want to read about programs, they want to read about people.
Yes.
So when I wrote about the Guardian Scholars for Titan Magazine, I started out with one particular student's experience and how he'd had this really hard life and how Cal State Fullerton gave him the singular opportunity to change his entire life around and all the people who had been behind who helped him. So did I write about the program? Yes,
Mhm.
but I really got into it through a human being. So I would tell writers, the story is about the Arboretum, but really the story needs to be about a person. Let's find a gardener who works there. Let's find a volunteer who works at the
Right.
Arboretum. Let's find a cacti expert who can talk about the desert landscaping part. Let's make it personal.
Mm.
And that's how I view almost every story is it has to have a human angle of some sort. Otherwise, you're going to lose the reader.
Ah, and it's like one thing that helped me get over my fear of not the imposter syndrome was just reading. I think people don't think like, especially in the younger generation, from what I've seen, they say nobody likes to read, and that's not true. You know, like you just need to find whatever scary book or interest you're
Right.
into, and like I'm just even if you're not a writer or consider yourself a writer, writing will help you with your communication.
You're
100.
absolutely right. I mean, you have to be a reader. And scary, it makes me think of I am not a huge horror fan,
Oh, fantastic.
but there is Stephen King is the master of the cliffhanger.
Oh,
So that like at the end of every chapter, you're thinking to yourself, it's 10 o'clock, I gotta start getting ready for bed. Tomorrow's an early day. You come to the end of the chapter and you're like, I cannot put this thing down. I
I
mean, you cannot put down his work, and it's such a lesson in writing well because he knows that he needs to grab you.
mhm.
You could put the book down at any given moment, but with him, you really can't because you just want to know what happens next.
Yeah, and the ability to be able to have this long form novel writing, whether it's fiction or autobiography, to be able to create something like that takes, I mean,
And
it,
he's a great lesson in writing, and he's written about writing before, but he is very disciplined. He writes every day. He writes at a certain time of day. He
mm,
doesn't move on with his day until he has written. And I mean, this is a prolific, I mean, an amazingly prolific writer, highly successful, but I mean, he could really rest on his laurels at this point, but he's disciplined every day, that discipline. I think that just, like you said, reading a lot is really a good way to become a better writer, but also you just need to write a lot, you
yeah,
know, you just need to write.
just write anything, even if
I
it's,
write in a journal every day. I write in a gratitude journal separately. Um, emails, whatever you have to write, just write, you know. And the more you write, the easier it will come.
and then when you're done writing, you drink some water and then you write some more.
Well, and the thing too that I think is really useful if you have the time to be able to do this is when I've written a feature story and I know that the client needs to see it, say the next day, I'll write it, I'll go, put it away, save it, and I'll take at least an hour trying to do something completely different before I come back to it, preferably the next day.
Yeah.
If you can wait overnight and then just read it one more time, you're guaranteed to find ways that you can improve it again.
Mhm.
Even on a major deadline, I'll try to do that where I'll step away and hopefully overnight and then read it one more time, and you'll that new perspective really helps. It's tempting to just bang it out and
Yeah.
send it, but I've known many times that I've regretted that and had to say, hey, wait a minute, can I revise that quote a little
Mhm.
bit or what have you?
Yeah.
So,
I think I think that segues perfectly into from when you start writing to some editing tips. What in addition to that, because I'm like that. It's like when I'm thinking of something, I have to write it down or else it will literally leave my mouth and I will forget, which is horrible because then I then I
oh,
feel
I'm like that too. I got to write everything down.
I have to write it all down and at that moment. And then I do the same thing. Like, I'll take a break and then I'll reread it with a fresh set of eyes. What are some other, editing tips that,
Well, if you can get someone else to read your work, that's always helpful.
Mhm.
Uh, but short of that, an old tip that's been around forever, but I think it's really useful is reading out loud.
Mm,
If you read your first few paragraphs out loud, at least, then you can check for rhythm and flow, as well as grammatical mistakes, spelling, those kinds of things. It helps to hear it. Um, and when you do that, then you'll catch things that you wouldn't have normally. An old copy editing tip is reading backwards.
oh,
So if you're really worried about typos and spelling and grammar,
mhm.
reading backwards will be very helpful. It's very time consuming, however. Um, the other thing is, uh, I was going to mention the use of quotes,
Hmm.
and editing has a lot to do with that. Um, Quotes are really important in stories for credibility's sake, but also for flow. The misuse of quotes, in other words, like breaking things up where they don't need to be broken up, or reiterating something that was already stated in your story, um, those are pretty easy to overcome mistakes in use of quotes. So you have to be judicious about the quotes you use and the people that you quote, but um, but quotes are really important, like I said, for establishing your credibility. So you say the guy found 70 different keys, and
Hmm.
then the guy quotes and says, I just knew that there was something off about that arrest, you know?
Mhm.
So
Yeah, to the
you're
story rather
magnifying it,
than
but you're not restating a fact. So, but back to editing, I think, again, because being concise is so important, and being, trying to eliminate extra words,
Mhm. Mhm.
that's again where editing can come in. Is you'll look at a sentence and you'll think, oh, I could shorten this 3 different ways.
Mhm.
So a sentence that's, I never write a lead, for instance. I never write a lead paragraph that's over 30 words long. It's
Oh,
an old formula that I learned way back in newspaper days when, men smoked at their desks, and we all had typewriters. But I just will not, I never ever do I have a lead paragraph that's over 30 words.
that
And
is
if it is, then I break it into two. But it's just an old formula that I learned that I've always paid attention to. And I have a little voice in my head from the old editor who taught me that. And every time I do it, I think of Ralph Alexander talking to me about that. 30 words, huh?
I have never met this person, but I feel like I definitely got a sense of exactly
Yeah.
who they are
He
from
was
your
an
impression.
old Herald Examiner writer from way back when, and he used to run a journalism camp. And that's how I was introduced to journalism after my senior year of high school.
Wow.
But so you need to get to the point quickly. You need to realize that your reader is pulled in a million different directions. So you have to be interesting, you have to be concise, you have to be factual, all those things. But I know it sounds really intimidating, doesn't it?
No, I think one of the hardest parts when editing is like, or for me when because I'm on both ends, right? Like my information gets edited as well as I'm editing other people's
Yes.
information all day. It's like, yeah, what do you think of that? What do you think of this tweet? What do you think? And I'm like, well, you don't need to put find more information. You can just put find information here.
Yes.
So like
Very good. Very good example.
every time I see it, I'm like, cut that word out. We don't need that.
Well, how about just visit?
Yeah, exactly. Visit, click here, check it out, like keeping the vernacular fresh while also, keeping it readable. And then AP style. I swear, AP style versus marketing style, Kathy. It's like editing, people's titles and things like that. How do you take what's your frame of mind going into editing something? Like when the next day and you sit down and you read what you originally wrote, where do you go mentally?
Hmm. I never really thought about it. I guess uh my my thinking would be, how can I make this better? So I already know that I have, say, 1,000 words, and that's the length that I need.
Mhm,
So I already know that. But when I go to read my first paragraph, I think, how can I make it more concise, more interesting, and make it sing in
mm,
the sense that somebody wants to continue to read.
mm,
And then once I get, and I figure that I've hooked them with that first paragraph or two, then my goal is to tell the story as accurately and concisely as I can and still make it life interesting. So, a vivid quote, or an interesting insight here and there to keep the reader interested. And then, I learned this from another writer at the agency that I worked at. He would often take a lead and then end the story by tying it in to what he'd mentioned at the very beginning. Now, you don't always have to do that. He would do it every time, but it does help that, say, your lead is about, I don't know, say you're writing about kids in cardiology,
mhm,
and you've written a statistic about, kids with heart disease, And then your last paragraph maybe is a quote from the cardiologist saying,
Mm,
know, uh, we're really pleased that, Children's Hospital is working toward reducing the number of cardiac incidents in kids. And
mhm.
you've tied it right back to where you started. Um, that can be helpful, but I also look at the ends of stories. Yeah, is it ending at a place that's appropriate? Is it ending with kind of a bang, so that people remember it? Um, so I'll look for all those things. And then that's not to even mention AP style, spelling, grammar. So those things actually come first, but you were talking about more of a like a how do you finesse a piece?
Finesse.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I just feel like I could just get an entire class on the finessing the process of editing. And the cool thing about it is it's all like you can always improve. Like you never stop becoming a better writer.
Well, and
Right?
my when I was preparing that class for Ken Hegihara, my I was practicing on my husband. My husband said, writing is something that everybody thinks they can do, and
Mm.
they're wrong. And it's kind of like, Matt, the photographer, would agree that everybody thinks they're a photographer now because we have fancy phones that take good photographs, right?
Yeah.
But we're not. There's a reason why we pay photographers to do that work. Well, there's a reason why people get paid to write well, because not everybody can, you know? I mean, I think the most that most people can aspire to is to just be able to write grammatically well and avoid misspellings. But not everybody is going to make a career as a writer. And those who do just really have to keep at it and keep improving. But not everybody can write. They think they can, but they can't.
They think I see words on buses, on billboards. I could do that. Super easy. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's so much more finessing and thank you for sharing how you sort of go into that first draft of editing your um, stuff. So my question now is we talked about the beginning writers, we talked about the editing process. It sounds like that could be great for anybody too, like just to be in that mindset and fall in love with writing instead of torment yourself and give yourself writer's block.
Right.
What do you think are some tips for experienced writers? People who have some time in the business, people who, sometimes I feel like, with this new generation, culture is changing too. So in your experience writing for so many different industries, understanding social and digital, and how do you write for, in your experience, what's some tips that you would remind experienced users, don't forget X, Y, or Z?
Well, I think the main thing is to try to keep it fresh.
Mm,
Um, I know it will be time for me to retire when I don't feel excited about telling a story.
mm,
You know what I mean? Like I actually just signed up for Medicare. I shouldn't say that, but I'll be 65 this summer. So, my kids have been saying, "So mom, when are you going to retire?" I don't think I ever want to completely because I enjoy writing, the act of writing, but I also enjoy just telling stories. So I think it is true that because I've been around for a long time, I am telling some of the same stories again that I told before. And if I couldn't find a fresh way to tell those stories or a new bit of information that I can impart, then I would retire. But so keeping things fresh is really important, and whether that means um, bringing in a new associate for a client that can see things a little differently, or whether it's talking to a new source. to kind of freshen an old story.
Fresh.
Um, it's you need to keep yourself fresh, and if you're not interested anymore, then it's time to give it up.
Wow, that's a really good advice. Keep it fresh. But yeah, sometimes I know people, they have deadline and, have to get the story out there so quick. So yeah, that's really good advice. On the
Well, thanks.
other end, I'm gonna switch it to brainstorming.
Mhm.
Now that, we went from baby cub writers to experienced veteran writers, we all brainstorm about stories and things like that. How do you brainstorm? What are some tips
Yeah,
that
it's more difficult when you're a solo practitioner.
Mm,
That's definitely something that I miss about working on a team. But I have a big network of people that, I've worked with over the years, and there are many people that are like me who work on their own. And within that network, it isn't unusual for us to call each other or send each other ideas and brainstorm that way. I've also called somebody up and just said, hey, can I just bend your ear for 15 minutes? And usually, how that works is that I'll talk, the other one will help me brainstorm, and then we'll go on to what they want to brainstorm about. So
mm,
it's usually reciprocal in that sense. Um, Also, if you have really interested clients who care about the product, they like to brainstorm too.
yeah.
So if I have an assignment, for instance, I have a new client that is a school of pharmacy, and I've been so intimidated because I don't really know anything about that industry. Well, what I'm finding is every single person that I talk to from that school is so enthusiastic about their work. They're so passionate that they are more than willing to brainstorm with me about the story itself and ways to handle it and who I should talk to and what I should ask them and that kind of thing. One of the things I always do with every single interview is when I'm done asking all the questions that I can think of and all the follow-ups, I'll say, what haven't I asked you that you think is important to include? And
Mm,
almost every time I'll get the best nugget that I got. Or I'll have somebody say, not only have you asked every question I can think of, but you've asked more. And so no, there's nothing else that I can add, But that's also an opening for, hey, I'm going to be working on the story in the next couple days. If I have follow-up questions, can I text you or call you? How would you like to receive that communication? Is it okay? And it's a
brainstorm,
good way of leaving things.
yeah, brainstorming with the source. That's a really, really good tip. And other people, I like to use a whiteboard. I'm like, I need to draw it out, and I'm like, I need to make a pretty picture.
Yeah, I had a friend that an associate one time that showed me how to do a mind map. Do you
Mm-hmm.
know that where you start with one idea and then you kind of go off in different directions? And she really swore by that mind map. That was how she crystallized her thinking. I tend to be much more less visual and more lists and written different sticky notes, things like that. But
Yeah,
however it takes to organize your thinking and, and getting your thoughts in order, that's
yeah. There's so many, and you heard it here, everyone. Writer's block does not exist, but deadlines do. Can we get an amen? Writer's block doesn't exist, but deadlines do. I feel like that's
yes.
gonna be my
And
stick.
actually, my husband likes to tease me because even if I had a really big project, I end up waiting till the last minute to do it. And part of it is journalism training. I grew up in newsrooms where, it's 5 o'clock, that's your deadline. And I get off on that
Rush.
adrenaline rush.
Yeah. Gotta get the best
Um,
story in the 2 hours. Let's do it.
so owning my own business, I really have had to discipline myself to, okay, if I have a big project, I'm not going to wait till the very end. I have to break it down into chunks. I have to make myself at least think about things,
Mm.
and usually what happens is I'll tell him, yeah, it looks like I waited till the last minute, but my subconscious has been working on this for days. So that when I actually sit down, I know exactly what I'm going to write.
Oh, and we'd actually love to hear your writing tips. So if you're listening or watching or reading the blog, and just give us your tips, share on social media. This is the WriteHer podcast, and thank you for joining us for this episode. We do a new episode every month. That's right, every month. That's accompanied by work from Kathy Douglas, which can be found at kathydouglas.com. Thanks for tuning in, everyone.
Bye.